You know how I knew?
Because you looked at my paper and you picked it up.
Yeah, I did. But we also had 0%. Had 100% get number one right on Google Forms.
Yeah.
So you should have put B. If you didn't put B, then you marked it right when you put on your Google form, so that one works. So answer for this one here would be B. I don't think we need to go into a whole lot of detail about it since we got 100% getting this one correct. So hey, nice job with that one. Number two, not quite as successful, although still not bad. 65%. Getting this one correct. Anyone feel reasonably confident in what you put? A. So we got metaphor. What are you seeing as your metaphor? Well, so first full paragraph was a pleasure to burn is primarily developed through the use of. So it was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed, with the brass knob on his fist, with the great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, his hands were the hands of the amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies, blazing, burning, bringing down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. So like up to this point, you see anything metaphorical that the entire thing? Nate, you had a hand going up too? Oh, okay. I thought you were going to argue for something else. I think some people were going personification as the choice. Jack, you're right with it being A. It is metaphor. So where there is, you have this with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene. People will see that and go personification. But the way that the question is worded is developed primarily through the use of. So what is the major thing that's getting done? Well, we have blood pounded in his head, hands were the hands of amazing conductor, plus with this example of personification, that's a type of metaphor. The whole thing pretty much going throughout, you are going to have strode in the swarm of fireflies. You have metaphor after metaphor after metaphor. So it's not just simply if you see that one example of personification, that's going to be enough. But the fact that you have multiple metaphors, at least 3, and this is a kind of metaphor, is going to let you know that that's the one that we want to go with. All right, but I think that might have kind of thrown some people off a little bit and make you go personification. Number 3, we were also sitting at 65%. So paragraph begins, he hung up, and to the paragraphs to follow, Montauk could best be described as. What would be like definitions for what we mean here? So if you're heartless, mean, terrible, you don't care, love, pretty much anything. So as Tommy say, absolutely no heart. What if you're oblivious? Anyone in here make you think of oblivious?
Not in here, but
Okay.
Really?
What's the difference between being oblivious and being indifferent?
Or
So-
caging.
Okay.
Or our whole page.
Or you right now listening to me?
Very much.
Okay. So indifferent, you don't care. Oblivious, you're not even aware about it. Heartless is going to have more of that negative cruelty to it, whereas indifference not going to necessarily worry. Self-indulgent, you're going to be more worried about yourself. Belak, what'd you do for this one? You didn't mark it down.
Come on, Nate. I know the right answer.
What do you mean you know the right answer?
Because whenever I looked at it,
So what's the right answer?
oh,
How come? Well, it is indifferent. Where would be some things that he is being indifferent? Because we want to have some kind of textual support that's going to back up the answer that we're going with. Hung up his black beetle-colored helmet, shined it, flung his flame-proof jacket neatly, showered luxuriously, and then whistling, hands in his pockets, walked across the upper floor of the fire station, fell down the hole. At the last moment, when disaster seemed positive, he pulled his hands from the pockets and broke his fall by grasping the golden pole. He slid to a squeaking halt, the heels 1 inch from the concrete floor downstairs. He walked out of the fire station along the midnight stream toward the subway, where where the subway where the silent air-propelled train slid soundlessly down its lubricated flue into the earth and let him out with a great puff of warm air on the cream-filled escalator rising to the suburb. Whistling, he let the escalator waft him into the still night air. He walked toward the corner, thinking little at all about nothing in particular. Before he reached the corner, however, he slowed as if a wind had sprung up from nowhere, as if someone had called his name. I would say there's one line that would jump out that's going to, I'd say that'd be a little detail, and then this one coming as if little or nothing at all, cared about anything in particular. That's where he is going to pretty much be indifferent. But yeah, if he's whistling, and whistling up here, hands in pockets, doesn't really seem to have a concern. There's nothing about him being heartless. You could kind of go, self-indulgent. He took a luxurious shower, but that's not going to be the way that he is developed the whole way throughout. He pretty much doesn't seem to have much of a care in the world. All right. So more than anything, seems kind of happy-go-lucky with whatever is going to be coming his way. Roman numerals, these are the questions that everyone loves. We're stuck on that 65%, which isn't bad. So about 2 out of 3 are getting this one. Author built suspense about the person whose presence Montauk senses right here at the end where we were looking at before by including hypothetical speculation, unusual deviation in syntax structure, repeated references to turning the corner. Are there any of them that of those 3 that you would go for sure gets mentioned? So hypothetical speculation, unusual deviations in syntax or sentence structure, or repeated references to turning the corner. I'd say one of those 3 you would notice fairly quickly.
3.
3?
Yeah.
Okay. Where do you see it being repeated, Tommy?
The last few nights,
Okay. And even just, I'm going to go kind of like up there because it gets mentioned. Second, thank you. It's easy when I look on a sheet of paper. I can't see them up here. There we go. So we got repetition, a corner there, moving in the starlight toward his house, felt that moment before making the turn. Even though it doesn't say corner, you're still making the turn at that point. So you got 3 times that it's simply getting mentioned right there. Anything unusual deviation in sentence structure. What does that mean, unusual deviation? A deviation is if you deviate, you change your course. So as long as the sentences are pretty much consistent, you're not going to have, walking the corner, you're not going to have a change, a deviation. Is there anything hypothetical? Hypothetical suggestion. You're trying to come up with maybe your own idea. Well, and you have, notice, question marks with the breathing, or was the atmosphere compressed doing these things here? Was there another one you were looking at? Yeah, with perhaps, so that repetition didn't mean to cross it out. So for this one, we have repetition of the idea of making that turn. There's some speculation that's happening. So we got 1 and 3. All right, 1 and 3, C. First 2, or the 2 paragraphs, which Clarice has described, notice, contains all of the following except. So if you see one of these things, that's not what you're going to mark off, but you're going to go that I'm trying to locate something that is not present in here. So is there simile, is there alliteration, is there personification, is there parallelism, whichever one of those is not there is what we're going with. Autumn leaves blew over the midnight pavement in such a way as to make the girl who was moving there seem fixed to a sliding walk, letting the motion of the wind and the leaves carry her forward. Her head was half bent to watch her shoes stir the circling leaves. Her face was slender and milk white, and it was in that kind of gentle hunger that touched over everything with tireless curiosity. Notice the beginning of these couple sentences. Her head was half bent. Her face was slender. Her, head, face, followed by was. Similar sentence structure, so that one's going to be, if you have two lines that are the same, they don't deviate, but they are parallel. So we have parallelism, so we know that it's not going to be this as the correct answer. And milk white, and it was a kind of gentle hunger that touched over everything with tireless curiosity. It was a look almost of pale surprise. The dark eyes were so fixed to the world that no one move escaped them. Her dress was white, and it whispered. Dresses don't whisper. That's an example of personification. He thought he heard the motion of her hands as she walked, an infinitely small sound now, the white stir of her face turning, and then discovered that she was a moment away from a man who stood in the middle of the pavement waiting. Still have the trees overheard made a great sound of letting down their dry rain. Girl stopped and looked as if she might pull back in surprise, but instead stood regarding Montauk with eyes so dark and shining and alive that he felt he had said something quite wonderful. He knew his mouth had only moved to say hello. When she seemed hypnotized by the salamander on his arm and the phoenix disc on his chest, he spoke again. There's a sound or a letter that gets used a fair amount. Small sound. She was a moment. Sound again. Stopped. She. Surprised. Shining. Said. Something. Say. Salamander spoke. Couple more over here. So we have that alliteration. What we don't have is the simile. All right. So that one's A. Watch out for, and they'll generally give you the all caps to remind you of it, but watch out for those questions where it throws in an except, because sometimes people go, hey, I just saw personification, mark C, where no, all of those things are going to be in there, but it's just not what we're looking for. This one was a little bit more of a struggle.
Oh, come on.
And it's not because the answer was E that's not up there. 41%. Description of Clarice's eyes are noticeable. How do her eyes get described? This is like same passage that we were looking at before. Dark eyes. How is she described? White, light, pale. So the description of the eyes in comparison to being pale, light, the white dress that she is wearing, those eyes are inconsistent with the rest of her description because it's like the opposite. So this one ends up being D. Did you get D?
No, I got it.
No. He's just trying to like rip your elbow ligament out.
No.
What'd you get for 7? Get a W.
Was it 100%?
82. So we doubled up that 41.
2 L's make it W.
1L, 1L.
Yeah.
Well, what'd you do?
I picked D.
You picked.
Yeah. That's what
Pick makes it sound like I just.
I chose the correct
Sure.
answer of D.
I use like process of elimination for this one. So like I knew it wasn't.
So we guessed.
A and
D.
B.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
pretty much.
instinctively.
Yeah, and like the whole, emptying his pockets doesn't mean that she's about to rob him. That would kind of be like that little distractor. Yeah, it's particularly perceptive. Walking about him, looking at him, trying to kind of figure out, analyze what are we dealing with. Emptying his pockets more on a metaphorical. And if you were going to take away may intend to rob him, that could kind of also knock out C in a little bit of a way. Process of elimination isn't bad. The best thing, though, would be if you can definitely validate why the answer would be. Now, with this one, it's a little bit trickier because it's such a short passage. But yeah, I think you can feel reasonably confident with it. And then the last part here for the first side, Montauk's words to Clarice about kerosene show all of the following except, we're at 59 for this one.
That's an L.
That's more than 50%.
It's not passing though in Brendan's book.
Top half.
You said C? And again, notice here we're going with accept. Resents his wife's complaint about the kerosene smell. That one would be correct. All right. Flipping passages now. Back to the Roman numeral. This one here, we're 53%. What do we mean by syntax? Vocab word from
Keystone.
sentence structure. So earlier, where we had a Roman numeral that talks about a deviation in sentence structure, a sudden shift in syntax would also be a deviation in sentence structure. So the last sentence of the first full paragraph, the room was not empty, is effective because it, looks like, do I have, oh no, we're good. All right. Do we get a shift in syntax? What you start having in this area, notice your sentences for a couple are becoming much shorter than what you have before. So you're going from lengthier sentences to ones that are going to be a little bit more direct. So you have a shift that's taking place in there. And it was like coming into a cold marbled room of a mausoleum after the moon had set. What's a mausoleum? It's a tomb.
Wait.
Oh, no, it's Coliseum.
Yeah.
Colosseum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
was like,
Where the gladiators are.
yeah.
If you're going into a tomb, you would expect that there's not going to be a person there. You have this tomb world, no sound from the great city, and then you get this message here, but the room is not empty. If you think you're walking into a tomb, you're talking about being tomb-like, you would expect there's not going to be a person there, so you get a shift here with the room was not empty. And that shift also occurs, notice, after you especially have this lengthier sentence with complete darkness, so it's meant to kind of like emphasize a point a little bit more. So it's 1 and 2. Passive voice would be if you were using to be verbs all the time, is, was, were. But this isn't doing anything so far as the effect of this. There is the was taking place, but that's not something that the writer's trying to do to emphasize a certain point that we would have going on. This one's a tricky question. More than half of you did get it right. I'm pretty happy with the 59%. Unusual description of the disappearing of Montauk's smile presents a or an. I think it boils down to 2 for most. Hyperbole. What's hyperbole?
I just love going
Hyperbole is exaggeration. It's not hyperbole. It is B. I could see people taking a look at C. He felt his smile slide away, melt, fold over, down on itself like a tallow skin. So I could see folks going, hey, there's like, and then therefore it's going to be simile. But like the stuff of a fantastic candle burning too long and now collapsing and now blown out, because keeps going with this idea of it melting, folding over, sliding, like as if it is going to be a candle collapsing, blowing out, he keeps going with the comparison. So whether it's simile or metaphor that you continue to develop, it's always going to still be referred to as an extended metaphor. So an extended metaphor could have a like or as, even though when we see like, we tend to think that that's going to be simile. 41 was one that was a little bit problematic for some folks. We had 41% with this one. The use of the sentence fragments in the 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th paragraphs. So this would be where we would be having like not a hint of the silver world outside, the windows tightly shut, the chamber of a tomb-like world, no sound coming from, the electrical murmur of the hidden wasp snug in the plastic pink warm nest. These little parts of the sentences, what do they tend to represent? For this one, it is coming back to his overall impression of what he is seeing. So C is the correct answer with this. But you're specifically going back over to fragments within the sentence as opposed to every single entire word that's getting used. 12 was 65%. I thought this one would be maybe a little higher. I don't know if maybe some folks got stuck with accept. Yeah, it's fire. So, his wife stretched on the bed, uncovered and cold. Cold. Body displayed on the lid of a tomb. Death. And the electronic sound of the ocean and music, talk coming in on the shore of her unsleeping mind. The waves coming in and bore her off their great tides of sound, floating her wide-eyed toward morning. So it's taking her out where she could drown. Nothing with warmth or fire taking place. So that's where we get D. And then 13. He stood very straight. In reference to Mildred the person, shows that he stood very straight and listened to the person on the dark bed in completely featureless night. The breath coming out of the nostrils were so faint, stirred only the furthest fringes of life, a small leaf, a black feather, a single fiber of hair. Referring to her as the person, not calling her by name, not calling her by what, his wife or partner or anything like that. So straight and listen to the person on the dark side, completely featureless night. She is just as featureless as the room and the night. There's nothing to specify who she is. It's not that he's forgotten the name. He knows that it's his wife that's in there, but basically she doesn't have any other discerning features that would make her stand out, much the same way that the room and the dark night would be. Again, all of the following. Brendan, did you go hyperbole
What did I go?
or hyperbole?
Actually, I went with understatement.
As did 82% of the people.
Let's go.
Josh?
House screamed. We have personification. Two giant hands have torn 10,000 miles of black linen. More personification taking place with the exaggeration happening there. And then, where'd the simile go? Oh, as if two giant hands. There's our simile. 15, 65%. He's feeling as if he is controlled, so he is robot. So on Monday and Tuesday, we're going to go back over some details with part 3, things that we did talk about earlier in the week, and then Wednesday is when we'll do one of these, but this time it'll be accuracy based. So, make sure to take a look at the types of questions that you had issues with, to see if there were any habits that you kind of fall into. Gavin, you said CRC?
Yeah.
Yeah.